Hello. So, a little bit of housekeeping. I am going to have a conversation with Alex. Alex, I met when I was involved with Democratic Party politics, back when I thought that the only way to be pro-worker was to be a leftist. I've certainly grown from that position. I'm also like pretty disappointed with most people who are in the leftist movement. I find them very unserious actors, much more interested in just critique for critique's sake, which gets us nowhere, uh, and are very much gnash their teeth at people who are in the trenches and just doing stuff, actually trying to get their hands dirty and do stuff. Alex, I don't know a ton about him. We got connected. I was posting on it was a some Facebook group with Dem Enter, right? Effectively leftists trying to move Democrats to be pro-worker instead of only pro-Wall Street. And he reached out to me. He thought that some of the things that I said were interesting. We started talking. I've kind of followed him since. He seems incredibly interesting, very well spoken for being this guy who walks around with all this Pokemon merch. And I'd really like to have a conversation with, what does it mean to travel, right? I believe, used to be in California, and now he's in Georgia, if I recall. We'll kind of get into that. Um, and what does it mean to travel during a pandemic? What sort of things has he undergone? Does Pokemon, help him be better, right? Better person, better citizen. I mean, I wrote a book, how being a video gamer actually helps me be a better player at the games of, politics and life. And I'm a Magic the Gathering nerd. I don't play very much. I also like to shower. So sorry to those Magic the Gathering nerds who also like to shower, but I just kind of pigeonholed you there. But there's a reason why there's a stereotype. Let's just put it that way. But I look, man, I want to see how can we talk about ideas that connect us, right? Where can we explore ideas that, he's Pokemon, I'm Magic the Gathering, right? I certainly think that we're going to find areas of overlap that we can explore and celebrate together. And that's really my main mission here, is to show just how much commonality we have, no matter if you're a white dude from Utah or a Puerto Rican, right? From, again, I believe Georgia, but soon to find out.
One second, I'm trying to figure something out on my computer here.
You are fine, sir. You do you.
I just installed the Zoom client on here because I upgraded to Windows 11, so I'm just getting it worked out now.
Did you really? Yeah, man. I don't know. I don't want to be part of Windows, right? Beta testing. So then I can be one of the tens of thousands of people that submit an error report and do their job for them, right? As they come out with a partially functional, new OS.
It doesn't feel like it's beta testing to me. I mean, I don't. Maybe if it is a beta, then that was not how it was presented to me, and that would be news to me.
I'm being much more cynical than is necessary, and they certainly beta tested, but they still don't have a lot of the you're dealing with the minimum viable product, and I don't like being on the front edge of dealing with a minimum viable product, because there's a lot of issues right? That your computer crashes and you've got to submit those error reports. You've got to stop what you're doing. Computer freezes up for however long, and yeah, it's annoying.
I feel like
Windows.
that would be. I feel like that would be kind of deleterious to the brand for them to be known to like release products that are not ready for public consumption, and that would be the experience that you.
You would think so, but where else are you gonna go, man?
Well, let me just
You
say
got a
that
monopoly on the market, right?
so far, I have not had that problem.
Okay, oh, I love it, dude. Well, that's good. That's good. Well, I'm digging the Pokemon merch. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and so really what I was hoping to accomplish with talking to you is we have kind of like I believe when we first met you were in California. Does that sound about right? When we first
That
started
does,
talking on Facebook?
yeah, that does sound right.
Um, and you are now in Georgia, is that correct?
That's correct.
Awesome. And you have had interesting travels. I uh, think that nerdy things like Magic the Gathering, like World of Warcraft, video games in general can make you a better person and a better, I guess, tactician. I don't know what you gain out of Pokemon other than maybe it looks cool, maybe you look fire with them abs, right? And Pikachu on your head, right? But I kind of hoping to discuss some areas of overlap of people who are just, seemingly different. Like you're Puerto Rican, is that correct?
That's right.
Right. And so I'm a white dude from Utah. We come from different backgrounds, and I think that if there's anything that we need during a pandemic, are just like people just talking about things that where we agree that I think that we can find meaningful impact within our community
Mhm.
and be more focused on that and less focused on like, hey, what color shirt are you wearing, right?
Sure.
Are you red or are you blue?
Yeah.
And so like let's kind of start with, we first started talking and I think you reached out to me. I was running my mouth on some Dem Enter group. You reached out to me and just thought I had something of interest to say, and we kind of connected from there and kind of been following each other. And then, but you were in California and you seemed pretty active on the streets. You really interact with the community. Kind of tell us a little bit about that. Like what was kind of your mission there, and what were you setting out to accomplish?
Well, something I don't actually talk about very much on my social media is that I'm an actor, and I was actually living in LA because this is my second time living in LA. The first time I was in my early 20s, and I was there studying. I moved back to Atlanta because they do a lot of production for film and television in Georgia because of a tax credit, so it seemed advantageous to me to go back to Atlanta. And now that I had studied, I felt like I would have better opportunities, and that turned out to be the case. I did work quite a bit in Atlanta, but there's a bit of a ceiling here in terms of opportunities because I mean it's not Los Angeles. So I moved back to LA, but concurrently I started developing a greater interest in government
Hmm.
uh, and the political atmosphere that it seemed all of us were steeped in. Um, I think I had just moved back to Atlanta shortly before the 2016 election. And prior to that, I had virtually no exposure to anything political. I didn't know anything about politics. Um, I didn't even know what the difference was between a Democrat or Republican. I just, I had a very rudimentary
I don't know
understanding.
if I even know. I mean, I pay a lot of attention, and I don't. But anyway, keep going.
I
Sorry.
had a very rudimentary understanding of American history and civics because I come from a really inner city neighborhood in New Jersey, Trenton, New Jersey. Our public schools are underfunded, and
Hmm.
there's just. But even outside of that, I just don't know if, like, even if I went to a better funded school, if like kids are in the right state of mind, if they're mature enough to be able to appreciate the things that they, wanted to teach us about, um, how the Constitution even came to be, what the intentions were of the founding fathers, and I mean, there's in meme culture, they always talk about how in school they never talk about how to do your taxes or anything that's practical as an adult. And so I just had no relationship with the government and knew
Yeah.
nothing about it. Um, so I became interested in politics because I felt like things in 2016 had gone a bit off the deep end, and um, I had very much an open mind to hearing uh, what positions there were out there. And actually, believe it or not, when Donald Trump first announced he was running for president, I was very open-minded to him. I knew him from The Apprentice, which was a show I did enjoy watching. Um, he was from New York. He seemed like, had this like bombastic personality. He was very much part of pop culture. And he said things like, "Oh, everyone's gonna have health care. It's gonna be beautiful." And I was uninsured. I was uninsured when I had
Mm,
appendicitis and I had to have an appendectomy. And
ouch.
they say, if you choose to be a part of the insurance system or not, but if you're
Mhm.
poor, you don't really have a choice.
Right.
When you have to have an appendectomy, your options are you get the surgery or you die.
Or
And
you did right.
it's not like
It's
I have
justice.
also the option to go shop around to different hospitals, like who's going to give me the better
Right.
price.
I'm on a budget. Yeah. Can I
Right.
get a discount? Yeah, for sure.
So the hospital billed me $20,000, and I had to pay it, and it was what it was.
Yep.
So when he said things like that, I had an open mind to things that he had to say, but it just didn't take very long for me to realize that he was very much out of his depth. Um, he still doesn't, but at the time did not understand, you know, how Congress functions. In his mind, you're the president, you're the CEO. Everyone just does what I say.
Right.
That's not how it works, and it's not supposed to work that way.
Right.
Because there's a multi-layered system of separation of powers. There's the system of one, which is the presidency, the system of few, which is the Supreme Court, and of many, which is Congress. And all of this
Right.
is supposed to be designed in such a way so that it's balanced. I think that people expect too much of presidents. And I also think that people give them way more credit than what they deserve, because the presidency has evolved. The office has evolved over time,
Hmm.
has sort of metastasized to have more responsibilities and things delegated to them that originally it was not its intended function. And I think, based off of just what I've observed, that that's a function of um, how dysfunctional Congress is, and the filibuster is a really big part of that. So when I was in California and in Atlanta, I saw an opportunity. I felt like I had um, almost a civic responsibility to be more involved in the electoral process.
Hmm.
And a lot of young people are not interested in politics, and understandably so. It can be very boring, although
Hmm.
lately it's not been boring. Has not been boring for a very long time. But it can be very boring. There's a lot to understand. When I talk to regular lay people about the filibuster, they just can't. They don't understand it. So when they say, "Well, okay, well, why don't the Democrats just do X, Y, and Z?" Well, because this is not that simple. Nothing is really that simple, and I personally think that's by design. They want everything to be complicated,
Yeah.
to get people to feel defeated, like they don't
Well,
really have
it's.
a
I
choice.
mean, so let's
Mm.
talk about the Trump administration a little bit, right? So he did run on healthcare for people. In fact, he actually ran left of Hillary Clinton, which was really interesting. And so this was like, wait a minute, is there really a possibility for a working class, right? Republican um, presidential candidate? But it didn't take long for, like you said, for it to appear that he was out of his depth. He thought that he could just go in and just bark these orders and completely move around the bureaucracy. The strangest thing that I find is, you also mentioned about what our forefathers had in mind. Right? I mean, they warned us that we've got a representative democracy. If
Right.
this constitutional republic, if we can hold on to it, right? And the very people who demand that Trump is like this arbiter of, like, of um patriotism and like this hero king. Well, that is instantly like anti-democratic, right? They really treat him like a king. They're really like, very
Right.
Trump or nothing, right? Trump or bust. And what really concerned me, like consider he ran on really big things like outside of healthcare, also tax reform that was supposed to help people like you and me, not him. Though of course he was going to work out. He's a businessman, right? So he's going to try to work out a deal for himself. Um, and then he also ran on building a wall.
Right. I
And
really want
so, right. And so
to.
the Republicans were in charge of the executive branch, right? They were in charge of the judicial branch, and they were in charge of the legislative branch. And what did they not do? They did not even mention at all building a border wall. What they did is they passed, tax reform. And what it did is it basically gave working class people about a 2 year, if I recall correctly, about 2 years where they got a little bit of a tax break, and then 8 years where their taxes are increased in order to pay for a tax reduction to super wealthy people.
Right.
Because
Some of the provisions have like a sunset clause on them or
yeah,
something like
well,
that.
and so as soon as 2 years were up, and then the Democrats then flipped Congress, right? So now the Senate and the executive branch are owned by Republicans. Well, that's when they started talking about the border wall. When they knew that for a fact that the only thing they had to do was like, look, bro, man, I'm trying to get this border wall, bro. Look, Axel, I get it, man. I get it. I know this is important to you, Axel. It's important to you and your family, right? Jobs. I don't want some stinky immigrant coming to take your job either, man. So you know what? But you know what? These Republicans, they hate Jesus, they hate America, and what we need to do is we need to work together because these Jesus hating America communists, right?
Yeah.
American hating communists, right? We got to, and we just throw these words around that are nonsensical, right? We don't really examine what they mean. I went to a Lincoln Day dinner just recently. I liked a lot of the people I met. Um, and so here's why I cannot associate with Democrats at all, especially leftists. Oh my
Sure.
God, especially leftists. This is my
So
problem.
firstly, how would you define a leftist? Tell me about that.
Okay, so I love that question. So when I went to DSA meetings, so let's
Democratic
start
Socialist
there.
of
So
America.
Democratic Socialists of America, I'd
Yeah.
go there and they'd spend more time making sure that people had the right the right I guess spend more time on the right pronouns versus like, hey, what's policy that's going to put food on the table. Let's make sure that we are talking about um, things like, let's be inclusive by using the word Latinx, as opposed to looking at actual research that shows, if I recall correctly, there's something on the order of like 60% of Latinos that it like drives them crazy to hear Latinx, and it actually like makes them actively hate. And so they actively work against, and secondly, um, they critique for the sake of critiquing, right? The second you say, hey, I like this person, well, that person has problematic views. Well, so do you, man. Like, who doesn't? Right? And they immediately try to critique without any sort of realistic plan to execute their own ideas. They just want to sit back and be that guy who's sitting on the sidelines making fun of the way that your dance moves, but they don't have the balls to get up on the dance floor themselves. And so,
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
That's a pretty good analogy. So let me just say that you know, I, in my mind, I would consider myself very left,
Hmm.
very progressive. But interestingly, I don't have that. I don't disagree with your assessment of that.
Yeah.
And it's actually been my frustration with. So AOC,
Hmm.
admittedly, I love her, but not all the time.
Sure.
When she voted against the bipartisan infrastructure bill, and I listened to her speak about it on her Instagram live for 40 minutes, I understand what she was saying. I understand the concept of there was a bait and switch. I understand all of that. I still wouldn't have voted no, because at the end of the day, so when I was in California, actually, I worked on Elizabeth Warren's campaign, her presidential campaign for six
Hmm.
months. I love Elizabeth Warren. Would you consider her leftist? Just a little quick side question.
Her, she's she's a more traditional Republican. She actually was. I
She's
liked her a lot more before she became a Democrat. Once she became a Democrat, dude, like whatever sort of like, I mean, I guess it's not really appropriate to say, look at that, the balls on her, right? But
you
whatever it is that she swings around, man, like she had it when she was a Republican, and
don't
she
think she
really
does it?
lost it, man. I think she really lost it. She really has cowed herself to people with inferior ideas.
I
um,
I'm not familiar with what her tenure was like when she was a Republican. I read her
yeah,
book.
she used to go after the Clintons about their corruption, Biden as
Oh,
well.
really?
Yeah, man, big
So
time.
I think this is what I think. Well, I'll go back to that in a second because that raises a really really good point about working within the Democratic Party and my surprising opinion on Joe Manchin. So so I worked for Elizabeth Warren for a little while, and one of the things that she discussed is you have to take what you can now and then come back to the table and ask for more.
Hmm.
There are inefficiencies and inequities in the system, but we cannot fix it through anarchy. We have to work from within the system that we have to make the changes that we want to see. And that's going to require everyone to be educated and participatory. And the fact of the matter is, we've come a really, really long way. In the very, very beginning of the history of this country. So actually, Article 2 of the Constitution says that the states can appoint their electors in any manner that they wish. It would turn out that this would be an integral piece of Trump's plan to overturn the election and essentially try to usurp power. But in the first half of the 19th century, I think half the states didn't even have an election for the presidency. The state legislature just appointed um, these electors who were supposed to be among the most
I
educated.
think the Senate used to also just be appointed as
That's
well.
right. The Senate also we didn't elect.
Hmm.
So, and for not even all white men could vote. You had to also own property.
Hmm.
Uh, so just, if you think about it through the course of time from the inception of this country to where we are now, we've come a really, really long way. And so I just feel like it's a little ridiculous to have such a totally defeatist attitude that like we can't
Hmm.
overcome whatever challenges we have now because
Love
we've
that.
overcome a lot. And so I understand the frustrations that people have with the current system that we have now. We can fix it, but the
Yeah.
only way we can fix it is if we involve everybody and educate
Mm.
them. And these are the things that we need to do so that we can get there.
Yeah.
Um,
There's a quote from Plato that says one of the penalties for not involving yourself in politics is you're ruled by your inferiors, and
right.
therein lies the problem, right? And this is why we live in a kakistocracy, if you're familiar with that term.
I am
It's
not
it's
educated.
effectively people who you got the least qualified people and the most prone to thievery within within the bureaucracy, and that's effectively a kakistocracy.
Interesting.
And it's not like it was unique to Trump or even Biden, man. Look how
Right.
bad Hunter Biden is, dude. It's gross. But I mean, look at, say, George W. Bush, right? Halliburton, right? Which technically Dick Cheney, had divorced himself from. Wink, wink.
Right.
And then they ended up making like $13 billion off of an illegal war, which we still have soldiers there today. I actually deployed to Kuwait and Iraq. My unit, we went out there in what December, or sorry, not December, January of '03. Um, and war
What
was
prompted
declared.
you to list?
So I enlisted 99.
Mm,
I actually got orders in March of '01 saying, congratulations, you're going to Kosovo in September 19th, 2001. It's like, sweet, Kosovo. All right, man. A humanitarian mission, right? There was a terrible war.
right.
War's over. We're going to go kind of help people. Combat support hospitals. Like, what could happen?
Right.
And then 8 days before that, man, was September 11th. And that was nuts, man. And so what I have a real problem with is that, I'm a guy who's spent time overseas. I've fought in multiple war zones, the Balkans as well as the Middle East. And I was always told that as an army soldier, that the point of me fighting over there was to preserve the values over here. was like, okay, well that actually makes a lot of sense,
Right.
and I'm
That's
following.
a very nationalist.
Yeah, but still, right? It makes, I mean, same thing with your family, man. The reason why I go over there to work is to make sure I can take care of what's most valuable over here in my family, right? In my house. And so
Yeah,
that makes
logically,
sense
that
and it
kind
resonates,
of
right? United we stand. Okay,
right.
I get it. Um, w- but then when I come home, man, I see that, well, hold on. What are our value statements? It seems to me that, when I said that, it's hard for me to tell, who's a Democrat and who's a Republican. Well, it seems that both corporate parties, right? And this isn't everyone within both parties, but
Right. Mm.
too many people within both parties. If you aren't adding to some sort of quarterly corporate profit, man, you're just cast upon the refuse heap to be forgotten. And
Right.
so, I was taught we don't leave Americans behind enemy lines. Well, what the hell, man? What gives? What about the enemy lines of poverty? What about medical bankruptcy, right? What about food and housing insecurity? And we have tens of millions of people at risk of losing their housing due to, a rent eviction. We've got people losing their jobs because they don't want to take an experimental vaccine that goes against the Nuremberg Code. And they feel weird about it. They can see that their government is obviously lying to you. Every talking head from Fox News to CNN to MSNBC is brought to you by Pfizer. Now take this vaccine. Um, and and we wonder why there's a bunch of poor and angry and scared people assaulting the Capitol. And the strangest
Well,
thing to me is that I
it's
was
both.
always told that. Well, hold on, let me just finish my point real quick, and I'll let you go.
Sure.
The strangest thing to me is that I was always told that if I screamed bomb in a crowded theater and people stampeded out and trampled somebody and they died, it was my fault because I screamed bomb. I was the one who incited the riot. And so, here's Donald Trump obviously inciting. His lawyers doing the same thing. And the only people being held accountable are a bunch of poor, starving people who have no money and no power and no way to fight back. And all of a sudden, people who appear to be agent provocateurs just disappear off of the FBI um no fly list, and so people who were on camera, um who were instigating, hey, let's go, let's go into the Capitol, come on guys, are just conveniently not there anymore. There's no public record of what happened. And I get a lot of this, thankfully, from like Crystal and Sagar from Breaking Points, because I wouldn't be able to see this with the corporate. And they want you to think that if you wear a red jersey, you somehow are an authoritarian barbarian, and if you wear a blue jersey again, you're some sort of a naive, idiot who hates America. And we have to be at each other's throats. Meanwhile, the vampires who rule the country are just siphoning our life force. But anyway, what were your thoughts?
Well, so there are two things that I perhaps want to challenge you on.
Yep, go for it.
The first, well, not one's is really a challenge. One's just a point I want to make. So they actually found that the overwhelming majority of the people who participated in the riot um, were not poor. Um, what was interesting was that the cross section, the profile of what most of these people were actually working class, upper working class, upper middle class, have businesses, they do well for themselves. The unemployment rate of the people who at least have thus far been arrested was really, really low. And so that was interesting to researchers because usually it is the poor disaffected that would stage such a revolt. But
Mhm.
what they found was that that the vast majority of these participants were overwhelmingly white, and
Mhm.
that they came from suburban counties, suburban regions from all 50 states that was at one point majority white, but has seen its white population decline as
Mhm.
more people of color have moved in and have become their neighbors. So they have found that this white replacement anxiety um, was really the linchpin that motivated these people to fight to take their country back, which is what they were told, that they were not going to have a country more. You have to fight and show strength.
Like with the Charlottesville march and with the tiki.
But that, literally Trump was saying this at the
Right.
event, giving
Right.
his speech.
So he's
So,
stoking these fires. He's yelling bomb, and he's okay.
so
So whether
mm,
poor of money, they're poor of education, right? Like look at what you were just
they're
talking
being
about.
manipulated. I
Yes.
sympathize. I sympathize with a lot of people who you might not have. A lot of people who read my posts or see my commentary probably would find it surprising how sympathetic I am to people who have conservative and Republican viewpoints.
Hmm.
Uh, the fact of the matter is, everyone is really just a product of their own experiences. You
Yeah.
can't know something that you were never taught or
Right.
never saw firsthand. So how could you know? How could you know what someone else's life is like if you only know your own?
Sure.
And when I listen to a lot of people discuss what their anxiety and frustration is, the sad truth of it is that the Democratic Party has a lot of responsibility to take for that. During Obama's term, there actually was a majority of he had a supermajority in both chambers. So why didn't they then do certain things? Like, they could have abolished the filibuster and then codified Roe versus Wade into law. They could have um, signed into law a comprehensive immigration reform. There were a number of things that they could have done that they chose not to do. And the Affordable Health Care Act was noble in its intent, and has expanded coverage to a lot of people, and it has helped a lot of people's lives. But to a lot of people, when you say, "Oh, Affordable Health Care Act," and they go in the marketplace and these plans are like $300 a month, that's not affordable. Um, I don't know exactly what went wrong, but it's a piecemeal approach that doesn't solve everyone's answers, and a lot of people in Middle America felt like they were being left behind. They felt like they weren't being heard. And it's interesting because I'm as violently leftist and progressive as it gets. Um, and being Puerto Rican and from a really poor neighborhood, I am really sympathetic to um, issues related to race, issues related to poverty. Um, but I think that the issue, eventually in time, my hope is that the Democratic Party will figure this out. But I think that the issue is that if you focus too much on race, um, it's you can mention it as like a side, like this is something that we're also trying to address, but it becomes too divisive to some people who don't understand the message you're trying to send, when really you should be focusing on class. Because in the early history of this country, that is how the aristocracy divided us. The white indentured servants were, just as fucked as the black slaves were, and when they teamed together, they were able to uh, have their own revolutions that was problematic to the aristocracy. So then they
That's why Fred Hampton and MLK and Martin Luther or and Malcolm X were assassinated, unfortunately, is because they were actually bridging that divide. And if you can keep people
right.
scared, you can keep people scared and thinking that somehow having America filled with more Hispanic people is somehow something to be frightened of. Well, they might fight tooth and nail over it. And you're absolutely right that the white indentured servitudes, right, when we were founding this land, and we had people coming over. I was reading a book called um, what was it, White Trash. That's right, White Trash, for the 400-year untold story of class, right, in America. And it just talks about when the governors were set up here and how poor white people were actually often by the aristocracy looked at as worse, like a mudblood. Like, you're making me look worse by looking like me and being that disgusting peasant. At least that person's a slave. And so it's always been a matter of mind manipulation. And Speaking of which, have you ever seen, quick aside, you ever seen Teen Titans Go?
Yeah.
Mind manipulation. Have you seen Teen Titans Go to the movies, dude? Dude, I was the one laughing the hardest in the theaters when I took my son to go see that. Dude, you can't take me anywhere, man. It's well, and I think that I think most importantly, right? Whether you are a Republican, whether you're Libertarian, Green Party, Democrat, whatever it is that you are, um, I think it's important to again figure out that like people are your neighbor, right? People are also looking to figure out how they can get create opportunities for their kids,
Right.
and be able to put food on the table. And if you can resonate with that and not be quick to offend, chances are you're going to make friends. And really, I mean, it seems like you've kind of learned this too, that if you can't be friends with people you disagree with, man, I mean, grow the hell up. I mean, really, what are you like 5? I mean, come
Well,
on.
the challenge now, again, my foray into politics is relatively recent, 5 years.
Hmm.
You know, um, there are people who have been around much longer than me, who remember what it was like before its era of Trumpism.
Yeah.
I think that the problem that, at least just from my perspective, even though we have the data to support the sentiment that politics has become more and more polarized over time, regardless. But I think that we're just at a point right now where people are so married to these identities that they have of being whatever, um, that it's hard for them to see past whatever they were told
Mm.
about the other person. And sometimes even so, I was a participant in the George Floyd protests. Obviously, I very much believe in Black Lives Matter. So much so that I have a banner in my house. But I don't post about it all the time, and I don't make it a part of my identity because I feel that that's performative.
Mhm.
And I also feel that means that I necessarily espouse all of what that movement has done, and
Right.
some of it has not been good.
Right.
And at the end of the day, um, if I feel like by me posting it, putting it like in my bio on Instagram or posting things about it constantly, that I'm contributing to this culture of tribalism. And that's just not something that I want to do. I can support the movement without, having paraphernalia everywhere, and without the
Mhm.
hashtags, and without, the performative aspect of it.
I agree.
Um,
I think that it's in kind of what you alluded to with economics.
mm,
I can show that I think Black Lives Matter by helping minimum wage employees actually make a living wage, right? Overwhelmingly, those are single Black women, right? People who need some of the most help. And so, there's a reason why they say economics is the great unifier. Like, I'm not impressed by people who scream at me that I need to say the right words, or that I'm not allowed to use other words. Like that doesn't impress me at all. If you're talking about community building, right, that looks beyond the stupid, right, flavor of politics of the day, and again allows Americans to figure out a way to put food on the table, for one. Two, the average birth rate right now is about 1.7 per family, and that's not even replacement value. People want to be at 2.5. Three, I'm actually curious about your thoughts here. um, the vaccine mandate that got shot down by the Supreme Court. That was only, as I understand, because it was going to go through OSHA. It's going to be a work-related thing. So what happens, since the entire cable news media is brought to you by Pfizer, that Pfizer at some point is going to create the narrative that in order to be a good citizen, you too need to take this vaccine, and Big Brother's watching, and you're going to take it. And so, what happens when the conservatives, who find that the most valuable thing to them is to fight for what they see as the most vulnerable, which are the unborn, and they get written in stone that your body, not your right, and the second the Supreme Court strikes down Roe v. Wade and sets that into stone, immediately puts that into place to where Pfizer can be like, gravy. Oh man, we made 35 billion last year. Here we oh, you mean like 300,000 people died of pericarditis. We made 100 billion.
So
And therein lies, and so that's why we got to look beyond our own immediate need, and like, are there unintended consequences to
so
what we're most passionate about?
speaking of looking past immediate need, there's a concept that I learned um, about in my the history of American governance class. It's called ordered liberty, and basically, the founding fathers understood that all of our rights have limitations to them, with the intention of creating a society where there's liberty, but it's ordered liberty, right? So there's a,
Mhm.
basically free, in short, freedom does not mean you can just do whatever you want. There are limitations to it. And among them are obligations that you have to society at large. So this is the reason why, you there it's regulated how you get a driver's license. You can't just get a license. It has to be regulated because it's in the interest of the public good to regulate
Make
this.
sure you aren't murdering people with this murder sled, right, flying around at high speeds. Yeah.
So so the in relation to Roe v. Wade and the vaccine mandates. So two things. So
Mm.
um the science community does not accept that um, a zygote or a fetus up until viability um, is considered a person, because the scientific definition that that uh, does not satisfy the scientific definition of what is considered living. So as far as the scientists are concerned, um, the position that a lot of abortion abolitionists have just isn't valid. Scientifically, just isn't valid. Now, I'm not religious, I'm not spiritual at all, but I am sympathetic to this position that people have, because you look at the images of, what it looks like when it's in the room, and it does evoke some emotions for some people, and I totally understand that. Um, that's why, actually, what has always been the case is that it's illegal to have an abortion within once you reach the third trimester, because then it's considered okay. Now that that fetus is viable outside of the womb with the medical intervention, um, that was what the cutoff point was prior, that for the up since Roe v. Wade established that um, it was women's rights, it was access to healthcare that gave them the right to be able to have an abortion. Um, it's looking like the
Mm.
Supreme Court is actually going to strike it down when
Mm.
they release their judgment this coming June at the end of their legislative
Which
session.
is, I'm more concerned about the vaccine mandate, and just that
Right.
this is an experimental vaccine. Pfizer is number one for payment settlements on just harm, right? Side effects that cause harm
Right.
to people. And big pharma used to be a thing that we used to fight. And so I guess the slight pushback I would give on the argument that science doesn't agree that a zygote is a living being, and while you're right. You don't need to be scientifically minded to be able to vote. There's nothing in the Constitution about that. But then also, science, in all likelihood, science created this pandemic. And so, like, what do you think of the argument of like, well, look, the Wuhan coronavirus was created in the Wuhan, coronavirus lab in Wuhan, China, and it was created because Anthony Fauci went behind Donald Trump. Anthony Fauci has been known for decades to be a big pharma avatar, right? He basically has Pfizer's hand up his, and he's just kind of moved around, and so he's like this sock puppet, and like this has been known. He is not somebody who actually does active research. He just is the guy who gets funds. Um, and therein lies the problem. And when we actually have when we have scientists that work in the field, and whether you like people like Robert Malone or not, he's a guy who, helped invent the mRNA technology. And then he gets like banned from Twitter And yet the guy who's most likely responsible by lifting the moratorium on gain-of-function research that was in place during the Obama administration was like, whoa, this is too dangerous. We're going to put in a moratorium. Fauci was probably thinking, well, this guy's an idiot. I need to go behind his back because what is he going to know? And then lo and behold, these greedy bastards, right? Like John Stewart said, right? There's just nobody in the room with these scientists who's like, yeah, I don't think we should be doing this, guys. This doesn't seem like such a good idea. Um, and so I like where your mind's at, that you want to kind of calibrate to some sort of objective, um, I guess an objective area of like, well, scientific consensus suggests.
Right.
And I don't think that's a bad way to think. I certainly do that a lot, but I think that there's more to life than just science.
Well, that's why we vote.
Yeah.
So if you feel differently, you're allowed to feel differently, and
I love it.
then you vote.
Yeah.
And so that's what it means to be in a democracy. This is the point of view that I have. Hopefully, you feel the same way. And if you don't, then then you go vote differently, and it is what it is. That's what it means to be in a democracy. But there are a number of things that you mentioned that that I do have some feelings about and want to address.
Sure.
Firstly, I'm not familiar with anything regarding Anthony Fauci having some history of anything nefarious. I have read briefly something about him having to do with some experiment where beagles were being exposed to some sandflies, and it turned out to not be entirely what it was being presented, but it did have there was some, link with his office, and I'm familiar with that much to the extent. But as far as his history of being, you know, a mole, I'm not familiar with that at
Well,
all.
it's
But I
not so
do
much a mole. It's just, I mean, it's nothing different than the FAA, right? We literally are watching the FAA being regulated by the very, private industry that they're supposed to regulate, right? The airline industry, and then people crash and burn and die, and then we look like Pikachu with a surprise face when the exact same thing happens with the FDA. That's all
so
this is, man.
so
This I'm not saying that Anthony Fauci woke up and wanted to stick forks in babies and eat them because he's this tyrannical evil guy. I'm just saying that business interests that do not care who's in the way of them making profits are the ones who are in charge, and the government agency that's supposed to govern them is actually being run by the private industry they're supposed to regulate. And it's the exact same thing as the FAA. And
so
again,
I
here
don't
we
think
are as Pikachu.
I don't think anybody disagrees at all that there's corruption in the government. I mean, this is not a new thing. We can talk
Sure.
about how, the opioid epidemic in Appalachia is directly caused by the FDA being in bed with the Sackler family. Pretty
Yeah.
far, they developed the labels that said, "Oh, this is not really that addictive." I mean, I don't think anyone disagrees that there is corruption in the high levels of within the agencies of our government. Um, and I have some feelings about that. But what I do think, by nature of this being a pandemic, this exists also in the rest of the world. So Pfizer's not the only company. It's not the only pharmaceutical company involved in developing therapeutics.
Just the biggest.
Perhaps just the biggest. I mean, they're very popular. They made Viagra, which is, a very popular product.
Man, they got Bob Dole as like doing their first commercial, if I remember. He's like, I
So
may have lost the presidency, but by God, I can get a boner.
they're a very, reputable company, reputable in some good ways, and also not in some good ways.
And disreputable maybe in other ways, right? Just because they're, I mean, it's, and again, like these are.
I mean, they're a company. At the end of the day, we live in a capitalist society, and we have this demand for growth that is unsustainable, and so that, and also deprioritizes human life. I mean, that's what's so perverse about this pandemic, is that, people who are sick, you got, just today I was at Starbucks, and this woman was getting really pissy with the barista because they didn't have some of the products that they usually carry. There's a pandemic, and people in these warehouses and are sick, and so maybe they're not making the products at the speed that it's being consumed. So there's a back order of the feta spinach wraps, which I miss. But we're in a pandemic, and so that's the nature of this. But to the woman at Starbucks, it was unacceptable, and so she has just been conditioned. And you know what? I have surprisingly some sympathy for her, because I feel she has been conditioned to think in this way in this society where everything needs to be made available at all costs, that human life has a very negligible price, and it's just all very unsustainable. No one's really paying the true cost of things when we go. And part of the reason why China is the issue that we have now is because these free trade agreements that have outsourced so many of our jobs to China and other countries like China, in service of making sure that the consumer has access to these products for really, really cheap. But the reality is it's the people at the top, the producers, who have this huge marginal spread because they're able to exploit the labor practices in China, where people are getting their fingers cut off in factories.
Right.
So they get this huge marginal spread. And yeah, okay, so maybe we get this product for $5 instead of 10. But then also the waste of this product, how this product is being delivered to us, and we're not paying the true cost of goods that we're consuming.
And it's worse than that, right? It's not just that. I mean, because at the end of the day, if I'm an American, right, and maybe this sounds callous, but why should I care? Right? Why should I care that somebody in China, right, got mangled in some loom or something, right, within some textile factory? But it's more than that, right? Because the company that outsourced that job in the first place, well, now that job's no longer there. So the job that you may have been able to have, well, often we hear that we can't, and this is where I think there's a lot of agreement within conservative and kind of leftist circles, is that helping people, right? Loving thy neighbor. That's a very Christian thing. Let's help people actually not live in a space where they are constantly in survival mode, where they don't know if they're going to pay their bills. They don't know if they're going to be able to make it on time. Daycare is only going up. I have a kid, dude, trying to do remote learning, and which we're in remote learning now again, is insane, man. It's one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. Because my kid just has too much emotions wrapped up for me to like try to command authority of like, hey, you need to pay attention to this. He immediately tries to employ things that he wouldn't try to employ with a teacher. And so it's incredibly difficult, and to have all that compounded. And so you're going to take it out, again, on people who have no money and no power, who are powerless to change the situation. And I think that the idea that we have unsustainable growth expectations, I don't think that's entirely right. I think based upon the model that we do things, you're probably closer right than not. And what I like the idea of the modern monetary theory, and what a lot of MMT guys push, because if we have our own sovereign currency, and China now produces most of the world's semiconductors, could shut down our entire economy, right? We couldn't get new cars anymore, couldn't get new computers, right? We use like 46, something like that, like 42, 46 of the world's microprocessors, and produce something like 16%. That's not good. China also manufactures most of the antibiotics. So if, say, there is another, say there's a bacterial pandemic, not a viral one. Well, sucks to suck there, America. Guess I'm just going to watch you, right? And so,
we have that issue with the PPE. A lot of the products, a lot of the PPE materials are being manufactured in China that we weren't capable of ramping up production.
Yeah, well, and then now, but then, you came from California. Look at what the Port of LA, and look at the supply chain disruptions of what happens when people are like, look, I don't want to be mistreated and go through a pandemic. Right. And so can we not leave people behind the enemy lines of poverty, food and housing insecurity, and actually work together? I mean, because at the end of the day, man, if you're not community building, dude, you're full of it. You're just lying, dude. You're just making stuff up.
I think that the conservative viewpoint is that poverty is a personal choice. And I think that the progressive viewpoint is that poverty is a policy choice. I personally feel that it's difficult to expect people who come from disadvantaged backgrounds to just grow and prosper. Like if we look at the model at how our public schools are funded, they're funded by the tax dollar, the property taxes of the houses in that community. Well, if the community is depressed, then it's not going to raise very much revenue. And so it's not going to be very well funded. And this system was created by design on purpose to keep people within this class system that
Sure,
we
bank redlining and
right.
other
You know,
right.
it's a very long history, and so this is where again, you know, the issues of class and race come very much hand in
Mm.
hand, particularly with U.S. history. So I think personally that the Democrats, if they were better at communicating with the public, they would have a better handle explaining, like, so there's a history of racial inequity, but also this is a class issue. So if you don't, if instead of trying to stoke anger and enthusiasm from people with fear, I think instead we should say, look, this we can build a better future if we focus on this issue, on these issues, and here's how. You know, for instance, we can reassess the way that we fund our public schools so that, you know, every child in America gets an adequate education independent of what zip code that they live or are born in. And but I think right now they're trying to harness the sort of enthusiasm that Donald Trump was able to do with his populist message by riling people up. I don't think it's going to work.
I don't know. So I don't like that people call Donald Trump populist, right? He says things that maybe got people who they're like, hey, he's saying things the same way that like the cheerleader is like Millhouse pointing at Bart, be like, look at Bart, he's doing stuff.
Right.
But it's like there's nothing popular about like the things that he did. He governed no different than a typical Republican. He may as well have been George W. Bush with a with a trash mouth. And that was really about it, man. Everything he ran on was complete garbage. He raised 70 million dollars for Stop the Steal, spent goose egg, not a cent on it, because in his fundraising he
Oh, he
had
doesn't have to. He
yeah,
has
he
the
didn't have to
Republican
because he
Party is
put it
great.
specifically
They're
in there.
even paying for his legal fees for some of the court cases that have nothing to do
And so he
with
actually raised taxes. He raised taxes on everyone there. And so my point too is that, like, look, we've for so long said, ask not what what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. Well, like you said, man, like, you pay taxes, which means that you help your neighbor's kids go to school.
right.
You help pave the road so I can go drive to the grocery store. You
Right.
help make sure that like the lights and stuff are functioning, that my city isn't falling apart and turning into Mad Max. And it seems to me that maybe you are doing your part. And I wonder if it's time for America to start giving a hand up, right? I don't believe in handouts. You're going to work for it. And I want to see what I would love to see, because I will be running for a local legislative position here in Utah this year.
Okay.
I'm not quite ready to announce yet. I'm working with my campaign manager to figure out the best time to do that. Um, but ultimately, I want to see how we can create something similar to like the old CCC, that really is like a job placement program that's run through the government. Because at the end of the day, we propagandize people from a very young age and give them unrealistic expectations of like when they're 4 or 5. Hey, what do you want to be when you grow up, little Johnny? It's like
Right.
a policeman. And then when they change their mind, he's like, you don't want to be a policeman anymore. It's like, I was 5, man. Like, how you gonna judge me, right? And then like people who ask you now, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? Or like disappointed that you don't know what you want to be. Like almost nobody has it together. And when you realize that everyone around you has freaking lost it and almost no one has it together, it gives you the liberty to realize that, you know what, everyone needs some help. And if you
I
can look
also
in a, go ahead.
go ahead, finish your thought.
No, I was going to say, if you can look in a way in which you can try to be grateful and give back again to that community, that mind, like, I don't care what your politics are, you're part of this community, and so you're one of us, right?
Mhm.
United we stand, right? Am I going to be a guy who screams at you because you don't stand for the Pledge of Allegiance while completely forgetting and dismissing the United we stand part, right? But
Mhm.
anyway, what were we saying?
Um, I also just, want to say that I don't personally believe that we exist to work. And I'm not suggesting that people shouldn't work. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not suggesting that everybody should just get a
You
degree.
Marxist terror.
I know, communist coming. But I just, I think that our value as humans in society is far greater than how much money we make, whatever it is that we produce for
Mhm.
ourselves or somebody else. And it's unfortunate that I think we are dreading the rising age of AI and automation that are going to replace jobs because ideally they should make our lives easier. Now people don't have to do menial tasks. They have more free time to pursue their passions that could really turn into something like antibiotics was developed. It was an accident, but it was developed by a scientist who liked science. The light bulb was developed by a scientist who liked science. A lot of these great innovations we enjoy came from people who had a passion, like music. No one's like, oh, I'm a pop star. I just kind of fell into this. Like, it was something they really wanted to do, and the stars aligned for them to get to where they wanted to go, and now they're making music, and people enjoy it. People love it. I think that it's unfortunate that in this country, if you don't have a shit ton of money, if you're not like producing and making, then you're just kind of left to die. And I think that that's kind of where we're just at a point right now in society during this moment of the great resignation, as it's said in the media, is that people are saying like, you know what, like, this is bullshit. It's not fucking, I'm not getting paid enough to deal with bullshit. Like, I want to enjoy my life. Like, I'm not going to be at this age forever. And I'm in this fucking office getting emails out the ass and yelled at all the time. And I'm not getting paid nearly enough. I'm like, you know what? Fuck that. I want to have greater agency of my own life. And I want to move on to something else and do something that I feel like is more rewarding and will actually give me the opportunity to enjoy my life. So remote working is like all the rage now. And there are some companies are saying like, well, productivity has gone down. My position on that is, this is kind of a new thing that we're doing. Remote work. First of all, remote work wasn't even possible until like 10 years ago, like when broadband internet wasn't even that widely available for people to even consider that they can like work from home. So I think there's going to be some growing pains in the process of us doing that, but I think it's something that needs to happen, because I think that people deserve to live fully dignified lives. Everybody deserves to have access to opportunities to be able to contribute to society, because when you work, you're paying taxes. And I think that people, this is my opinion, I don't know this for sure, but I really think that people would feel less acrimonious about tax time if they felt that they were getting a value for their money.
Yeah.
And if they felt like the government was truly always working in their best interest. And what I would like to see from leadership and government is a more concerted effort to restore the public's faith in our governmental institutions. This was one of the things that I really liked about Joe Biden at first, but he has sort of kind of fallen. So again, like I was saying before, I think people expect too much of the president. I think Joe Biden has done many great things, but has done a lot of things that I don't appreciate. And I just want to say he was my last choice during the primary. So, but I voted for him because I really felt like there was no other choice in the general election. But he said he wanted to restore the public's faith in, for instance, the CDC. Well, now Trump's not in office anymore, and and Biden has a new appointee at the CDC. So why again are we still having issues of mixed messaging? Even Joe Biden, for instance, when they were talking about the boosters, Joe Biden like went ahead of the scientists and said, oh yeah, boosters are going to be available end of August. And all the scientists at the FDA were like, we have no idea what you're talking about. We've not discussed any of that. We're not there yet. And I'm sure Pfizer and Moderna were looking at each other like, okay, sure. No, this was ahead of time. It was disjointed. And, this recent from the CDC where they said that if you can shorten your isolation period to 5 days and then return back to work. What the full message should have been, but they didn't clarify, was after 5 days, you have to test. And if you are negative, then you return back to work. But they didn't say that at first. And now they're saying that. So there's confusion. And the reason why they're saying they didn't say that at first was because, well, there wasn't a lot of availability for tests. So if we told people that, they wouldn't be able to get tests. It would be a run on tests. And so then they wouldn't get back to work anyway. Okay, well, then you should have, that should have been.
Right. It shows nothing but a bungled ineptitude at every level. And therein lies the problem.
And also when they said, oh, if you're fully vaccinated, you could take your masks off. That's not true. What they said that because they thought that, oh, maybe that would incentivize people to.
But then they didn't actually turn around and apologize for being wrong or the data changing. They just expected you just to follow suit. And therein lies the problem. There was no sincerity. And so I actually spent about 6.5 years at the University of Utah. I worked in pediatric medical research. I worked in outpatient data within pediatrics as well. The chair of pediatrics told me in a direct email that Josh, if you had a superpower, it's giving meaningful feedback and encouragement. I was like, holy cow, man, that's freaking awesome.
That's
So this is
crazy.
like king of this space, right?
Mhm.
And pediatrics outside of maybe the cancer hospital is probably the most profitable area. So now this guy outside of like the president of the university is about as big as it gets. It's like, dude, that's freaking cool. And so I really respected this guy, and I was following a lot of the, hey, we're gonna wear the mask until we get vaccines. I was forced to get a vaccine. It seemed like it was my duty to do. I got Moderna, and man, it wrecked me a bit. It was not fun. Um, but then all of a sudden, I got vaccinated, and I still had to wear a mask. I was like, well, hold on. So he had an amnesty box, right? Dr. Angelo Giardino. So I sent an email to that amnesty box and asked, hey, what gives? And he filibustered, man. Here's a guy who's very direct to the point, really likes to, very friendly though. And then he sent me about 6 times as much words as was necessary to tell me nothing. And then it's just like, so the ineptitude is at every level, and it's like they're forcing people who know better to have to cover for that ineptitude, and then
Right.
they're now losing trust. And dude, I left, like, I was in a place where I've been wanting to get after politics. I've been wanting to figure out a way to help out and help my community, and like you said, it takes money. Working for the university, I did not make very much of it. And then I got to a place where, one thing that I think people who play Magic the Gathering and, Pokemon can agree on is that, sometimes having an imagination and magical thinking can actually lead to transformational thoughts. Um, and things that are meta real you can ascribe to them more than just like the idea that you're a real person. So I can only interact with you in the way in which I interact with real things. But the idea of like Pikachu, right? If I want to be Pikachu like, I can then identify how Pikachu is in every aspect of my being, far beyond anything that is as real as you and I.
Sure.
And if I do that, say with Jesus, right? I was listening to Jordan Peterson, and he was secularizing the Bible, right? I'm a secularist. So I was like, okay, well, that's interesting, right? The Bible. I heard him talking about like, what if Abraham and Isaac was not about a story about a guy who's about to murder his son, but it's a story that, what if that which you love the most, right? The parable, that which you love the most is exactly that which is holding you back. And what if you need to be willing to sacrifice it in order to be able to move forward? And so I heard that, and the second I heard it, dude, I knew exactly what it meant. Within a month, I put in my month resignation. So I gave him 4 weeks. Still didn't do them the good. I mean, they're so slow to hire. But then um, within my new job, it took me about 2 months to start making about 2.5 times what I was making, and now each month I'm consistently making 4 to 5 times what I was making at the university. And so stepping out in faith and having magical thinking actually is not bad. And I think that being able to identify with people who look at the world differently. Like I grew up reading Terry Brooks novels, right, fantasy. I'm rereading The Wheel of Time. I was excited the TV show was going to come out, and then it's like got all the production value of like a WB, like Legends of Tomorrow. And like Legends of Tomorrow is funny, but this isn't supposed to be Legends of Tomorrow.
Right.
and so,
Right.
but like I gain a lot of value and find a lot of moral centering through magical thinking, man. And I have no problem with then looking at the ideas of Jesus in being the archetype of the greatest human that could ever live, and then helping me identify, well, what if instead of, I have to worship one God, right, because my God is a jealous God, what if it just means that perfection demands everything of you, and if you're not being the perfect self that you know that you can be, you're probably going to start to, in your conscience is probably going to start to gnaw away at you, because you know better. And what if that's all that is? What if that's what it means to have a jealous God? That, the idea of the most perfect person that could ever exist just really wants you to aspire after that as well. And while you'll never reach it, it's the path, right? That's more meaningful, not the destination. And so, I think, and I want to see how I can use my newfound success to sponsor things like Magic the Gathering tournaments, man. And talk to people like, look at this, guys. Like you guys are tacticians. I am not impressed by somebody who will go out and spend $600 on a deck of like a pre-built deck that they just researched. I like I want to put some money on the table and have some people be able to win money because they actually put together a deck. If that's a 9-year-old, cool, good for you, right? But let's figure out like, you guys are tacticians. And if you can think that way, and if Plato said that, one of the penalties of not involving yourself in politics is that you are then ruled by your inferiors. Well, how do we get you involved? Could I perhaps start to engage some people by giving back some of my newfound wealth that I and my success? And so, can I give back to my community in more than just a political run for office? Yeah, for sure, man. I've got nerd friends. A buddy of mine owns what's called the Nerd Store. And so I really want to see what I can do to, again, these overlapping values, right? We all breathe, we're all human, we all are, it's all necessary for us to have the bottom three levels of Maslow's hierarchy of needs taken care of. And we really, really, really want the fourth one, which is, if you're familiar with those, the fourth one is respect of others, respect for yourself, where we walk around ashamed a lot because, like, oh, I don't know what I want to do when I grow up. Look at everyone else around. They must know. Look how confident they are. Inside their heads are doing the exact same thing.
And that was part of what I was mentioning before about, I think it's deleterious that people think this way, because I don't think that we're even meant to think this way. I don't think that I mean, I'm not religious at all. I'm not really spiritual, but I don't, whether whether we were put here by a divine being or whether we were created through, just chaos, I don't think
Mhm.
that it's to work. In either scenario, we were not here. We don't exist to work, regardless of whatever it is that you believe. And so what you were saying about how people really beat themselves up because they don't have like a career figured out, they're not self-actualized in this way. This is a completely unnecessary social sickness that is entirely of our own creation.
So I think I see what you're saying. The thing that I do like about work is that it ensures that you've got skin in the game.
Well, I'm not against work.
It's
I'm not against
completely,
work at all.
yeah, okay. So it's
I'm not
completely,
anti-work. I'm just
yeah,
saying that
it's
I
completely
don't think that we don't
bastardized, right?
exist to work.
Yeah.
Mm.
Okay. No, I like that, man. And because it's hard on your psyche, right? If you are, finding value in yourself based upon your work. And,
Yeah,
like I was in a place where I was told by the chair of pediatrics that I had a superpower that's basically needed throughout from coast to coast throughout this world, right? Or throughout this country right now, right? A superpower that can give meaningful feedback and encouragement during a pandemic. I mean, did that come with any sort of material, you know, raise? No, not at all. It was an attaboy. And while again, that was meaningful to me,
yeah.
and it was meaningful to me that I had friends who were professors and who were doctors, and that I could easily keep up with them in conversation, even though, dude, I've only got a 2-year college education because I read a lot and I inform, my brain and I like to learn. And I had to be willing to sacrifice my love of that and my love of like, look how different I am, but how easily I am able to, how I need to prove myself here rather than go out on my own. And once I
Right.
went out on my own, man, and stepped out in faith, dude, it's nuts. It's I've the blessings I've poured in because now I'm using my skills and I'm shining. And so I
And
would
that's
like to
great.
be able to
Great.
give back and help others be connected to where their skills can help them shine. And
Mhm.
hopefully, man, we can save people from a nihilistic existence that it just saps the soul, man. It hurts.
And so I'm sure that, through this new path you discovered, um, it feels good to feel valued, and it feels good to feel valued doing something that you enjoy. And I think ultimately everybody wants to belong.
Hmm.
I think everybody wants to feel accepted. Everybody wants to feel like a contribution, but not everyone can be a doctor. Not everyone can be a
Right.
lawyer, so, but every contribution I think is a valuable one, or else we wouldn't have needed it in the first place. These jobs that I low skill, low wage jobs, if those jobs weren't important, if we didn't need those jobs, we wouldn't have hired a human body to fill those positions anyway.
Right.
So, I think that there are people who have really admirable jobs, who do things that are really important, that keep us safe, that keep us healthy and keep us clean. And, people look down on it because it's, either it's hard labor, or you work in sanitation, or you do something that is, that they don't think is valuable. But at the end of the day, were these people not fulfilling these jobs, were these people not stocking the shelves, sweeping the floors, none of this would be possible. There'd be no stores, there'd be nothing, because these jobs are what is keeping everything running. Is what's
And those are the same people
really the
that
backbone of our economy.
those are the same people that we called heroes at the beginning of the economy, or at the beginning of the economy, the beginning of the pandemic. And they were so heroic that what the elites did, they made a commercial in their honor. I mean, man, I wish I had a I mean, it's right. And like in New York, right? New York threw away like 20,000 hospital beds. So they're getting rid of hospital beds during a pandemic, right? These hero nurses, right? There's 70,000 nurses at risk of being fired because they don't want to take an experimental vaccine.
So you mentioned that I wanted to, this was another thing that I wanted to talk about.
Yep.
So I'm actually in the trial that Moderna is conducting for the vaccine, for the initial vaccine. And I've been in it since, I don't know if you knew this, because I've posted about this a few times, but it'll be 2 years this coming August. And so 2 years before, 2 years since this coming August is when I entered the program, the trial.
Okay.
And, so I'm not an expert on messenger ribonucleic acid, and I don't know everything there is to know about the vaccine, but
For sure.
I consider myself fairly informed on the mechanics of the vaccine and the process by which it's come to be manufactured and distributed so widely. So when you say experimental, what exactly do you mean by that?
I mean that hasn't gone under the typical rigorous clinical trials. When I worked in the clinical trials office, actually working in pediatric medical research, right? These are things that take years, man. And you've got to have test groups, and you've got to have your control group, and you've got to see what happens. You've got to see what sort of side effects there are. You got to document them. You got to see if it's worth it. You would pull, like, if there are children that are getting myo and pericarditis, right, they would pull funding in a second. But because we're in a panicky state and we're scared, it's really easy to control and go ahead and just keep pumping out this vaccine. And so it does go to show that the like the long-term COVID, I don't know if you've heard of like the vaccine injuries, or where people get like some people take the vaccine and there's something that happens. There's injurious to their body that lasts a long time. And it's pretty much the exact same thing as long haul COVID. And so there's something to do with the spike protein. I was listening to Dr. Malone talk about how the spike protein doesn't actually leave your system for about 15 months or so. And if you're constantly getting an injection of, every 6 months with the booster shot, well, that's where it's going to cause your body to overreact. When your body's overreacting, that's what causes the cytokines to then be expressed a lot of times out of your fat cells, as I believe. It can really wreak havoc on your body. And Americans were really fat, and so this is a pretty terrible disease for us.
So okay, so about Dr. Malone, so he has misrepresented a number of things about his involvement in the process of the development of this part of mRNA. With that, so because by virtue of this misrepresentation, it makes it very difficult for me to take anything that he says seriously. Going back to the development of the vaccine stuff that you mentioned, typically, it is true that a lot of what goes into the process of developing a vaccine takes minimum 4 years, and that was considered like fast. 4 years was considered fast for developing a vaccine. Now, to my understanding, the best of my understanding from what I've read, it isn't that corners haven't been cut. They've done things in tandem concurrently, and they've also, because of funding, were able to do things in a more expeditious manner. So to my understanding, there haven't been corners cut in the development and research of these vaccines. And actually, when the vaccines were first distributed, they were distributed under an emergency use authorization from the FDA, which was an understanding that because the trial is still not over, I'm still in this trial for 2 years
Sure.
until August. So technically, the trial for this vaccine is still underway.
Right.
But
Well, the Emergency Authorization Act can only be employed if there, as I understand it, there might be more, involved with it, but as I understand, it can only be employed if there's no active like therapy or no active treatment.
I don't know if that's true. I can't comment on that. That may
And
be.
so with that, right, there was a real concerted effort to demonize anyone who took like ivermectin or like, and what's so interesting is that the people who created ivermectin, they got a Nobel Peace Prize, right? And so like this is something that's been given out billions of times, and but it's really cheap. It's incredibly cheap, right? This is a generic drug that's incredibly cheap, and it makes it so viruses can't replicate in vitro, so like inside your body.
So let me just say that this recent philosophy of using ivermectin as a therapeutic against COVID is a relatively recent one and was not popular during the time of when Moderna, J&J, and Pfizer's vaccines got the emergency use authorization. What was popular leading up to that moment was the use of hydroxychloroquine and oleander, which Mike Lindell, who's the My Pillow guy, has been trying to sell, and azithromycin, which is an antibiotic.
Yeah, the Z-Pack. Yep.
Right. So the concern was, and we can even discuss ivermectin in this respect as well. The concern was that there wasn't the scientific community, the general consensus was that we're just not sure that this is actually going to be helpful. It could be some of the studies. Now, I don't have a background in public health. I'm not an epidemiologist, so I feel like if you have not taken extensive courses in biostatistics, you are not trained to interpret this kind of data. But from my understanding, a lot of these studies were either not peer reviewed. It just seemed like the science didn't fully support that any of these things could actually work to treat. That doesn't mean that we know for a fact it doesn't work. It just means, okay, it may or may not work, but this person took a Z-Pack and is feeling better is not proof that it works. It could just be coincidental that you took the Z-Pack and you got better.
And that's not unfair, right? That's not unfair criticism at all. And where I am really interested in getting people who are tacticians and are tactically minded, right? They know how to think. And what I'm more concerned about is not necessarily does ivermectin work or does a Z-Pack, right? Azithromycin, does that work? I'm more concerned with why is it being demonized and why am I not allowed to talk about it? And so the second I'm not allowed to talk about it, and especially when there's a financial conflict of interest, and especially working again in the research, dude, if I had any sort of conflict of interest financially, I'd be fired, man. Here I am again seeing every talking head that warns me that I'm not allowed to talk about ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine, right? Again, every single one of them, whether it be from Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, every single one of them is brought to you by Pfizer. And so I don't need to have the statistics to say, hey, there's something that's not right here. And this is where I want people to be tactically minded and kind of see the pattern there and be like, well, hey, what gives? Why can't I talk about this? And then where does that go once you pull that thread?
So I'm not familiar with this authoritarian sentiment that you are not allowed to talk about these things. That would be counterproductive.
Well, I mean, what about Joe Rogan, man? You said that you don't know, people who are interested in watching Joe Rogan. Well, but like Joe Rogan, like they immediately made fun of him and said Joe Rogan taking horse paste, dude. It's not like he just went to a veterinarian. He got that like issued by a doctor, right? And so that's and so this is what I mean by you're not allowed and so what they do is they smear you so you look like a crazy person, and that's what it means to not be allowed to talk about it.
So in America, everything has a price.
Mhm.
And so everything has been commodified, including medicine. You can get a doctor to prescribe you virtually anything for anything, or you can find a doctor to get you what it is that you want. There are some doctors who you go in and you have a flu and they will prescribe you antibiotics because they understand that people want a pill. They want to feel like they're getting a product. They want a pill. They
Sure,
want
it's big pharma
people
that pushes that, right?
people
It's big
want
pharma that makes that
products.
happen.
We have a consumerist culture where people want a product. So
Mhm.
that he got a doctor to prescribe it to him really doesn't mean anything because one, ivermectin does have a legitimate medical use in humans. So it's not the issue wasn't that they were using ivermectin, and I do think it was inappropriate for people to say, oh well, he was using
Mhm.
Vortex because it does have a legitimate medical use, as does hydroxychloroquine. Um, they're legitimate therapeutics.
Mhm.
I think that the issue was that. So I listened to some segments of some episodes that he's had, and it just to me is disappointing because I feel like he is someone with a lot of influence, and he has used this position without. I feel it's been irresponsible. So again, he's neither an epidemiologist, virologist, or has a background in public health, and he also is not trained to read to interpret the data that he pulls from Verse or wherever it is that he gets from the internet. And I watched a segment where he was discussing with another doctor about how, um, oh well, the vaccine when given to a certain age group, there was a X amount of slight increase in the chance that they would develop myocarditis, uh, which is an inflammation of
The
the
heart,
right.
right?
Um, and the doctor said, well, sure, but also getting COVID has like a
It was
10
like a
higher.
7 time increase or something.
Right. And so then Joe Rogan responded, well, I don't think that that's true. I don't think that that's true. And I think that the problem is that you should know that if that's true or not. And it took having a doctor who knew that information beforehand to say, well, then look it up. And so then they looked it up in real time and he saw that he was wrong. And, I feel like I feel that, you shouldn't challenge someone else on their expertise if you don't really even understand the science behind it yourself. And so what if that doctor just wasn't familiar with that information? Then it would have gone unchallenged. And so then that would have been misinformation going out there to create more vaccine hesitancy. And I'm not saying that vaccine hesitancy isn't valid. I know there are many reasons why people have concerns, and I am largely
Mhm.
sympathetic to them. And I think those are conversations worth having. But this would have been something that would have been unnecessary because it would not have been true. And I just think that if you want to discuss the vaccine and you want to have
Mhm.
doctors on there to make the case, great. But I feel like then the line of questioning should be, well, I'm reading that the vaccine can do X, Y, and Z. So can you tell me what you know about this? But instead, the conversation was like, well, it does do this. And I don't think it's true what you said, that if you get COVID, that your likelihood of developing myocarditis is even higher.
And
Um,
so do you think that it's fair, and please let me know if you don't, do you think it's fair that, since Joe Rogan at the end of the day did go ahead and look it up, and did go ahead and actually admit, oh wow, that's cool. I guess I was wrong. Do you think it's fair that your issue with him is a critique for critique's sake? I mean, because
no,
at the
but
end of the
I
day,
don't
he
think that it's a
he
critique for
brings people
critiques.
on there specifically to challenge him, man. Like
I
that's why he
think
brings them on there. It's not because he wants to agree with him, because he finds them interesting and he wants to know. He sincerely, authentically wants to know, but he's gonna make sure that you've got to fight to like, yeah, are you just spreading BS? Because up to my understanding, and then that guy brought in, will actually look it up here, Jamie, go here. And that's great. And that's why he does that. And I think that's actually much more valuable to show that you can want to stand up for something and change your mind and then be thankful that somebody proved you wrong. I think that's much more valuable than potentially spreading a half truth.
the um the animus behind my critique is that this is actually a pattern of a number of things that he has said, and he has misinterpreted. So and I just think for somebody with that much influence, it can get very dangerous. So for just another example, unrelated to the vaccine, but kind of related to some political talking points. He posted about how that there was censorship on social media because of things that they were saying. Maybe it even was in relation to the vaccine or to the pandemic in general.
Mhm.
But what people don't understand, seemingly, is that your right to free speech ensconces you from being addressed by the government or by a governmental force. So you are allowed to express whatever your opinions are, and the government can't retaliate against you. However, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, these platforms are all private entities. And so on their platform, they can decide what speech is and isn't allowed within the legal boundaries, because they can't allow child pornography, that would be illegal. But they can decide, okay, well, we think that anything that you say that it goes counter to what the scientific consensus is about the pandemic is misinformation. And so we're going to put warnings on the things that you say that this may or may not be true. You should look into it further. And people are saying that this is censorship, that this is big tech censoring them. And that's just not, it's a violation of their First Amendment rights. And that just simply isn't true.
But who
In
gets to
fact,
decide, man? If there's a conflict of interest, a financial conflict of interest behind who's saying that this is fake science, and maybe it is fake science. But again, and this is a problem I have with people like Ted Cruz, is that there's times that Ted Cruz will talk, and I'll be like, dude, I like a lot of what you're saying right now, but you've said a lot of stupid things. You burnt a lot of social capital. That is hard for me to believe you. It's hard for me to believe that you actually are saying and that you actually believe what you say, which is why like I've been so beyond disappointed with people like Bernie Sanders. But he's somebody that believes what he says, and so I find a lot of honor in that, and I respect him. But at the end of the day, I'm less interested in what Joe Rogan says and much more interested in what his guests say. For instance, like he had an investigative reporter on about breathing, James Nestor. Since I watched that and I started changing my breathing, like my thoughts are clearer. I don't react to stress as negatively. I'm able to be in the moment much more. It helps my mental health. Rhonda Patrick has, taught me the benefits of saunas and steam rooms, which has given me a place to where I can get my workout while also, meditating, which has shown phenomenal results within just my clarity of thought. He's introduced me to Jordan Peterson and Jocko Willink that have given me, like 2021 was the biggest hellscape of my life. And gave me the tools to be able to manage that and actually and not want to kill myself. And so I'm much less concerned about what he says. I like that he's interested, that he's asking from an authentic point of view, and I'm much more interested in what his guests say. And I love that at the end of the day, he just wants to be challenged, because I don't want people to think Joe Rogan says this, therefore I'm going to say that. I want people to say, well, look at this guy who knows how to be challenged. He knows how to look it up. He knows how to look a fool in the moment, and he knows how to be grateful that he was made a fool. And that's powerful, man. And I think that's a
um,
way to build bridges.
I think my issue isn't with Joe Rogan having a show where he has talk shows. I mean, that's what people who have influence do and who own these kinds of properties. They have talk shows. People come in. Oprah's been doing it, left or right. That's not the issue. My issue with him specifically and how he conducts is that I feel it's he's essentially he's a guy, just a regular guy, which I think is part of the allure, is that he seems like a regular guy. He's relatable, who's sort of masquerading as a journalist. And sometimes it works really well, and sometimes he doesn't go challenged, or sometimes he says things that isn't true, and there's no one there to refute him. And in I'm not a journalist either, but when I look at like 60 Minutes, or when I look at journalists who have won like Peabody Awards, and when I listen
Mhm.
to them speak and when I listen to them interview people, um, and sometimes, even, Jen Psaki, who's the press secretary of the White House, gets challenged by the press. And that to me is that I think these press briefings are a really, really good example of what good journalism should look like, because Jen Psaki goes up there, she says her point of view, she says what she thinks, and the News Corps is supposed to challenge her. And so that I feel like there is more of like a back and forth. But Jen Psaki isn't somebody who's saying, like, she's not someone with influence with a show that's so popular, she's working for the White House. And so we
Mhm.
understand that she's somebody who's working for the government and that she's trying to relay this information, who she should rightfully be challenged by a news corps. And Joe Rogan doesn't have that. Joe Rogan
Mhm.
can choose who his guests are. He can choose how the conversation goes. Um, and sometimes, like I said, he will say things that will go unchallenged because either his guest won't challenge them or his guest just doesn't know. And then he'll go like, oh, he'll say, we need to get off Twitter because Twitter is trampling on our First Amendment right, when that's just not true.
And yet his platform is so much less destructive than corporate media, man. Nicole
And I have an
Wallace,
issue with them as well.
right?
Just to be fair, I
Nicole
have an issue
Wallace,
with them
who's
as well.
part of
Hmm.
MSNBC, right? She was part of George W. Bush campaign. She was absolutely part and parcel of what got us involved in the Iraq War that
Sure.
I served in, that we still have people there. We knew less than a year in that it was an illegal war. We still have people there. Obama said he was going to end it. Yeah, he ended it on paper and kept people there. He won a Nobel Peace Prize and started 5 illegal wars. And so Rogan maybe he's problematic. And certainly if you feel necessary to feel that way, man, then feel that way. But like he is so much less destructive than corporate media. Corporate
I
media
don't disagree with
is
that at
just,
all. I
yeah.
don't disagree with that.
Um,
I just
and
think
so
that
I'd much rather have somebody show an authentic way of looking at the world, even if he happens to be wrong, because I'm a human too, man. I'm gonna have bad ideas. I'm gonna arrive at wrong conclusions. And I
well,
want people to be able to measure me on the entirety of what I say and not just who I am in that moment when I'm wrong.
how do you know that Joe Rogan also himself doesn't have some sort of conflict of interests in the background? I mean, we don't know. I'm not. I mean, I don't
I mean,
follow.
he technically has a financial conflict of interest, but I like to from the way I've seen him act, he doesn't seem to act any different. He comes off as sincere. But again, I'm much more interested again in what his guests have to say and less interested in what because I want to be taught by people who are smarter than me. I he helps me think in ways of how just a regular person can look at the world. So that's very valuable to me. But I tune in to see his guests, man, not just to hear him, wax on.
Sure,
And
sure.
so
And
that's where I get a lot of value.
I don't watch him. I've just seen a lot of clips from his show. Really, that's been just my interaction with his content.
Be careful with that, man. I used
Clips
to
of his
think
show.
terrible things about Jordan Peterson until I actually watched his stuff.
I don't
And then
think
once I watched him for real, like he laid me bare, and it's like, my God, the impression I got from only watching clips was the exact opposite. And so just be aware of who's curating, right? Whatever it is you're looking at.
it's usually whenever he says something, and then like it'll be all over Twitter, and then there'll be a clip of whatever it is that he says. And my issue with I don't the thing is Joe Rogan to me is I don't want to say he's a regular guy. He's clearly not just a regular guy.
Clearly not.
He's done very well for himself. But in terms of what I think makes him attractive to people, and in terms of how he carries himself and communicates with the public and expresses himself, is very much what the regular guy would look like. And I think it's great that people have someone like him that they can relate to, and they might be exposed to some really good information, because I know he's had Bernie Sanders on his show. I know that he's had um,
Mhm.
Elon Musk on his show, although lately I've not been a very good fan of. I used to love Elon Musk so much, not some more. But I think I don't have an issue with Joe Rogan
Mhm.
really, because he's doing his job. He's doing what he's always done.
Sure.
That's made him popular, and he's done very well for himself. I just think that honestly, some of it also has to do with what I see is a lot of this fervor from conservatives who want to lionize anybody who would fight back against I don't know, I guess the leftist line of thinking, and simply because Joe Rogan says something about everyone get off Twitter and go on Getter, which is like the right wing version of Twitter that's supposedly supposed to have I don't know, a different terms of service as it relates to what things people can
Yeah, I
post.
created a Getter account. I'm not active on social media very
I
much.
took a look
I
at
saw
it,
it, and
and
then I took a look at it, and
I
it's
took a
like
look at it.
I'm barely active on Twitter. I will be hiring people to help me be active just because I can't handle all that.
Right. I mean, you're
So
gonna
I'll
have
have
to.
people that kind of help with my campaign here pretty soon. But yeah, man. Well, the thing is like, we clearly had a disagreement and we talked about it, and that's like at the end of the day, that's really what I hope people can do. Like, even if you walk away and say like, I didn't change your mind, like if we can come together and talk about things that we disagree with, or disagree on, and not like throw stones at each other, I think that's what's most meaningful, and I think that's how you show people how to be better, and how to
I
be
think
better Americans.
I think what's really helped with that is that we've had sort of a Facebook friendship for
Yeah.
quite some time. And so we've been exposed to each other's political thoughts over the
So we
course of.
kind of are prepared for,
Right.
yeah.
So, I mean, at the end of the day, this is really what I believe. I just think
Mhm.
that everybody, most Americans, we all really want the same thing, which is a prosperous society where everybody's happy and contributing, and this utopia where things are great. But we just have different philosophies on how we get there.
Yep.
And I understand why some people would have a different point of view than me, and I just hope that when I express some things to people, like, well, I was in that position. For instance, the first time I lived in LA, I lived in my car for a year and a half, and I was 22.
Damn.
I was working full time, but it was
Yep.
just really expensive, and I
Yep.
was working at a restaurant, and I just really was not making that much money. And the thing is, I could have rented a room from somebody, but I decided I would rather that money go towards making sure that I have money to pay my bills, pay for my classes, and so that I can eat and have
Hmm.
so much of and on top of it, I don't want to live like an hour and a half outside of the city in a neighborhood that's like not that great when I could just live right here in town in my car. And to me, it was a temporary sacrifice that I would absolutely do it again if I were in a position to have to do that, because honestly, it really wasn't that bad. One, it forces you to, okay, you're in your car when you sleep, but then when you wake up, you go to the park, you go to the gym, you're more active, you're doing things. I was on time to everything because I was in my car. So there was no, I was, whenever I had somewhere to be. In fact, it was great. If I had to be in Santa Monica in the morning, I would avoid all traffic. I would just drive
You
overnight.
just park there and sleep.
Yeah, and I would be right there ready to go. And I got to
So
see. It
believe it or
was
not, man,
great.
you may not be religious, but the Bible is all throughout, right? So you either sacrifice and stay where you are, or you sacrifice and you invest in yourself and figure out a meaningful path forward. And and it's basically a book of literature that's canonical throughout time of what great people have done, and often great people have to make hard choices and sacrifices like that.
Right.
um and I think that's a good place to end it, man. I think that's awesome. I didn't know that you struggled with that, and I think that's just another thing to show that just how interesting people are. It's so easy to be like, well, look at you, you're a leftist, you're probably just lazy. Like, bruh, I lived in my
Right.
car for a year and a
I'm
half to
sure a
make
lot of
sure that I
people.
could actually be
Right.
successful.
And don't get
And
me wrong,
so,
there are people who are lazy. There are
right,
people who abuse the
yep,
system. There are people who do commit fraud, like what
yep,
has happened with the PPP loans, and that absolutely does exist. Abuse does exist,
yep,
and I'm not excusing it at all. Um, but I don't think we should say, oh well, because people steal, we can't help anybody. I just
right.
don't believe that. I
I
just
agree.
don't believe that.
I agree with
Um,
that, man. I like that a
I
lot.
I do want to mention one thing about Joe Manchin and why I'm a
Oh
lot
yeah.
more sympathetic towards him than I am most people would think, as someone who's so violently progressive and leftist. Um, Joe Manchin, um, you don't get to be the governor and twice elected senator of a state, being a Democrat in a very, very conservative state, a state that went to Trump by like 12 points. Um, without knowing your constituency, without having some political calculus behind it, and being good at what you do. Now, don't get me wrong, I absolutely think that there was some corruption going on there between the fossil fuel industry and his campaign,
Sure.
1,000%. But at the end of the day, you know, we should look past party affiliation.
Hmm.
I think that this Republican Democrat dichotomy is oversimplified, and it doesn't serve the varying interests that people have. Some people
There's
are like,
nobody. Yep.
there's no left or like red or blue. Like some people are kind of shades of whatever. And
Hmm.
I think that, Joe Manchin has a responsibility. He has never been super liberal. And so I don't think it's fair to expect that he suddenly become this liberal champion, uh,
Hmm.
and, you know, and basically pick up the slack of the Democratic Party everywhere else where they failed, because he was not the only senator who ran in their elections. In Georgia, I worked very hard to get Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff elected, and we
Hmm.
did our part here in Georgia. But there were other Democratic candidates who ran in their elections and they lost. and they
Yeah.
lost for a variety of reasons. They may have lost, but the point is that they lost, and I don't think it's fair to expect that Joe Manchin change his political uh, proclivities to do what everybody else wants him to do. And so that was my frustration with the Progressive Party, the Progressive Caucus, is because I felt like they were trying to beat him into shape to
That
do.
that seems prudent of you, and I like the way you, and so I guess the only thing that I would say is people who legislate out of Kentucky, West Virginia, anywhere where there might be some sort of, Appalachian Mountains, maybe Tennessee area. If you ever watch the documentary on YouTube, How Poor People Survive in the USA, yeah, they just don't impress me, dude. Just how gross it is, just the
Right.
way that we treat people.
No, absolutely, a
But
thousand percent.
yeah, and so I wish I could trust progressives could actually follow through on what they say. AOC, like you mentioned, she was much more radical with the day that she entered in Congress than really anything that she did. And so I wish that that Republicans, I wish that they believed in constitutional rights as much as it seems that they do. That said, I feel like I've also been a bit of a naive dipshit, and I don't want to open up a bit of a can of worms because I do gotta wrap things up.
Sure.
But I do feel like I've been a bit of a naive dipshit when it comes to the Second Amendment guys, like the guys that are like, "My guns till I die." Dude, seeing how the entire country of Australia is kind of locking down, it's like, okay, so there's crazy people who just have a loaded shotgun and throw it in their closet, and some 2-year-old finds it and blasts their head off, or and kills somebody. Yeah, those are people who make me think that that people who value these guns until they die are crazy people. But there's something
I don't
legitimately
think that they're crazy.
there's something legitimately there that
Yeah.
that we need to protect against, because the government would not blink twice about just bulldozing over, and we see that in many different ways. And Australia scares me. I've certainly valued guns, but I didn't fully understand that level of just, vehemence for the Second Amendment. But I think I'm starting to understand it now, and I think
Well,
I'm starting to see what it was that I didn't see. And I like that I can talk to people now who I disagree with, so I can see things that I didn't want to see, and I don't have to be so caught up in my own views, and I don't have to be offended that somebody's got a different point of view than me.
well, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I know you said you didn't want to open up another set of words, but I just want to say very quickly about the
Yep.
second. This this philosophy that the Second Amendment means that everybody can carry a gun is actually a very new interpretation of what the Second Amendment
Sure. Yeah, by the Supreme Court. That's an evolution of.
versus Heller was actually what changed that in
I
legal.
like the idea of well regulated, right? I don't know, like it's necessary for you to be in a militia, but I like the idea of well regulated. I would personally like to create jobs that have people going to the rifle range, going to their handgun range, making sure that if they truly are going to carry around a sidearm or something to protect themselves or others, that they're not going to shoot somebody else who's
Right.
not their intended target because they don't know what the hell they're doing. Because in many states, you can carry a sidearm concealed and not even know how to operate it.
Right. If you
And
have
that's scary.
if you have a mental health issue and you are just not in your right state of mind, you could have an addiction problem.
Right.
Could be a number of factors that I think need to be considered on whether or not it's a good idea if you're carrying a gun. But we can get into that another time.
Yeah, I love that, man. Well, and the thing is again, it just comes back to, right, we all have overlapping values. And if we start from that point, I think that that's what's best.
I think so
But
too.
well, dude, I love it, man. I really appreciate your time. This was great, dude.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And I we didn't quite get into gaming as much as I wanted. We
We're
kind
getting
of
there.
really just stayed around, politics.
Yeah.
But maybe that means that we should have a round two and kind of talk a little bit more about, video games and kind of where you feel they might make you stronger, or maybe even create blind spots,
Oh,
right?
I
Like,
can told you that. My Pikachu back there.
yeah, I see that. Yeah, you had your Pikachu too. Yeah, yeah, for sure, man. Awesome. All right, man. Well, thank you so much for your time, and
Yeah.